Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Vince. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to share with you an idea I think you should know about, and that's the social theory of Rene Girard. Girard, whether one agrees with him or not, is a very fascinating scholar with a wide berth of knowledge. He was a historian, a literary critic, an anthropologist, a sociologist, and a philosopher, and ultimately, what I'm interested most in is a theologian. He was a historian first, but he ended up having to teach a class on literature, and he said he didn't know anything about literature. And so what he did was, this is kind of in his own words, he looked for similarities in the stories that he was teaching in order to help him remember the stories so that he could teach them better. And what he noticed was, something that led to a big theory on literary criticism and later on theology. So to explain this theory, I'm going to put it into some steps which are really, really oversimplified. But then I'm going to try to explain each step as best I can. So the first step is, at the heart of human nature is this deep-rooted competition. Now, that's not exactly correct. It's not competition, so if you're a Rene Girard scholar, you're probably not watching this anyway. But let's just go ahead and say, like, at the heart of human nature is this deep-rooted competition. Second, this competition naturally leads us to violence. So we compete against one another and we're violent towards one another. Third, if this violence is unmitigated, then we just simply can't live together. Okay, so that's pretty easy, right? Fourth, as our societies grow, it's important to mitigate the violence so that we can live together. And in order to do that, our human anger against one another has to be placed somewhere else. And what Girard says is it's placed on a scapegoat. Okay, so that's the short solution. So even though it works, it's a very short solution. So fifth, for a long-term solution, humans need to basically change their ways, to stop scapegoating. They need to identify their own culpability, and they need to stop being competitive. Okay, so those are like 5 steps, that I came up with. But basically, we're competitive. That makes us angry at one another. We can't live together. So in order to live together, we take our anger, we place it on a scapegoat. But what we really need to do is really need to solve the root of our anger. All right, so let's deal with each one of those individually. First, at the heart of human nature, I said, is a deep-rooted competition. But it's not exactly competition. Rather, it's what Girard calls mimesis. He says that we have this deep-rooted desire to have what others have, or to have what others think we should have. So you might think of children. Like, I remember one time when my son had this, he was like 3 years old, and he found this remote control, and it didn't do anything. But he stood around, and he was having fun with it, and he was lifting it up and everything, and acting like he was controlling a car. And there was this much older kid in the room, like 10 or 11, and just cried and cried because he couldn't have that remote control. And we kept saying, well, that remote control doesn't do anything. You know it doesn't do anything, right? But once my son was done, he gave the remote control to the bigger kid, and the bigger kid really just kind of stood there and held that remote control, right? Just last week, my 2 5-year-old twins were crying because one of them had a maze book and the other one wanted it. And I said, oh, would you like a maze? I can make you a maze, or I can get you another maze book. Nope, they wanted that maze book, right? And I said, well, do you like mazes? No. Okay. So anyway, that's mimesis. As grown-ups, this can also often manifest itself like power and position. So we want the same job as somebody else, or we want the same house, or we just want respect like that we think we deserve, but we really don't want it for ourselves. We want it because others say that that's important. Girard says we really don't know what we want, and so we look at others to help us decide what we want. So think about advertising, like a car commercial. To get you to buy a car, they don't lay out like this is why our car is better than all the other cars. What they do is they show you someone driving the car and how much they're enjoying themselves and how they get this sense of power when they do it. And then we decide, oh, that's what we want also. Girard calls this mimesis, or mimetic desire. And like I said, it's deep-rooted, which means it's really a part of us. We can't overcome it. In fact, we really don't even realize that we do it. So even for people who want to say, well, I don't desire anything, or I'm cool, like I stopped being like everyone else a long time ago. Well, still, you're defining yourself in relation to other people. And in fact, in saying I'm different, you're even lifting yourself more above other people, or trying to, because you think that's what other people think is cool, right? So that's also based on mimetic desire. We make these decisions based on what we see in others. We come up with what we think is the best position, and somehow we think our position is better, and we'll be envied by others, right? So anyway, that's mimesis. Earlier, I used the word conflict, and I said, we're always in conflict with one another, but that's not really exactly true. What I meant is that in mimetic desire, more often than not, it does put us in a state of conflict, especially if there's not enough resources. So we all want the same car because we see somebody else is enjoying it, but there's not enough cars for everybody, right? And so this leads to anger. And so what happens? Well, step 2 is violence. And that's pretty self-explanatory. We fight over things, right? So step 3, if this violence is unmitigated, we can't live in societies. So what's happened historically is that one tribe would just separate from the other to avoid violence. They experience this mimetic desire, they compete, they get angry at one another, and one tribe just goes to a different place. So for societies to form, we need to find something to do with all this violence. So the 4th step is scapegoating. And what Girard finds is that in societies in the past, in all of literature he reads and the myths he uncovers, as societies start to grow, there always emerges a scapegoat, an outsider that everyone can put their hatred on. So, and remember, this is more of a literary theory to begin with. Like, he's in literature, and so he's reading all these stories, and he's finding all these similarities, and he's saying, look at this. Throughout all these cultures, that's the big idea, is to scapegoat somebody. A good example of the scapegoating mechanism is like in Julius Caesar, in Shakespeare. So the Senate, in order to keep cohesion, take out their violence on Julius Caesar. And they can't just kill him, they each have to stab him. And in fact, they specifically tell us that they're doing it to save Rome. So Caesar is no doubt a scapegoat that is sacrificed so the community might live. Generally, in real life, societies do this more to the other, the person who's not in the majority. And we might think of our current situation in America. We desire what others have, or what we perceive that others have. That makes us jealous. We get angry. But instead of going to war, for instance, the poor going to war with the rich, or the workers getting upset that at the ever-growing company and corporate greed, we put all that anger into the Mexicans, right? And to me, that's a good example, because we often claim that it's because they're coming into this country illegally. But it creates distrust of all Mexicans and Latin Americans. And in a very real way, this hatred toward the outsider keeps us from hating the insider. We can say things like, they're stealing our jobs. And so we can say a they plus and us. And we don't actually have to look at each other and see, what the greater reason for, economic instability is. We can just place it on somebody else that we don't really understand. So seeking a scapegoat, that's where religion comes in. Girard noticed that all religions were very similar in the way they offered sacrifices. And what he says is, during the sacrifice, we go to our priest or whatever, we take all that anger that we have towards our neighbor or towards the person that has what we want, our mimetic desire, right? And we put all of that anger onto this sacrificial goat. And then we kill that goat, right? So that is the sacrifice. The sacrificial system is effective, but it's only effective in the short term, because as time goes on, we just need more and more sacrifices to appease our anger. And that includes more and more scapegoats, so so more and more violence. So if we look at the scapegoat as the outsider or the outcast, we just keep putting more and more violence on them and finding more and more people to be scared of, or to be different, and to kick out or to blame our problems on, and for these short-term solutions. It's important to note here that in order for this scapegoat system to work, we have to believe that the scapegoat is ultimately guilty of whatever they say they're guilty of, right? So basically, in order for the whole system to work, we have to buy into it. It has to remain an illusion. Like, we can't just pick out the scapegoat, the Mexicans, and say, oh, you're the problem for the problem, knowing that they're really not the problem. Okay, we have to buy into it. And the animal sacrifice is really guilty because it takes on our sins. The Mexicans really are guilty because we can say, well, they came here illegally. The slaves are guilty because they just want to defile our white women, right? So it doesn't take a lot. Like if just one black slave defiles or rapes a white woman, that's enough for us to say, well, all of them must be doing that, so they all really deserve this slavery, right? They all really deserve right? That's where that comes from. That whole it's not just this one individual, but they all are the scapegoat, and they all are guilty. A very good example of this, I think, of needing to prove the scapegoat guilty happened in the death of George Floyd. So you may all remember that in 2020, George Floyd, a black man, died after a white police officer, seemingly for no reason, choked him to death by kneeling on his neck. Like everybody saw the footage and said, hey, this guy died innocently, right? Well, we can't have that. We can't have him die innocently because the black community has been saying this for a long time, that police officers, those upholding the rules, they're treating us differently. They're very violent towards us. And in essence, we are being scapegoated and we're innocent. But they can't be innocent because if they are, then all of a sudden we have to change our whole system, our whole way of thinking. In fact, we realize, oh my gosh, if they're innocent, maybe I have a problem, right? Maybe, well, either that, or we have to say, okay, well, they're innocent and we're still just going to kill everybody. Like we're going to give in to our violent desires and just kill every black person we see. So either that, or we have to look inside and say, hey, we really got to change society because we're the actual ones that are guilty here. And that's something that we want to avoid at all costs, right? We, as human beings, we want to protect ourselves, and we don't want to say, this George Floyd must have been guilty of something. And so we try to find things that George Floyd might be guilty of. We want to find George Floyd guilty of something, right? We need to protect ourselves. We need to protect the scapegoat, or it doesn't work. And so we say, well, George Floyd, he had drugs on him, right? And somehow we make the leap that if he had drugs on him, he deserves death, right? So that's why it's so easy to make that connection, because we want that connection to be there. And then if there's someone who says, no, he really didn't have drugs on him, or he might have, but drugs aren't punishable by death, he's really innocent, then we say, oh, well, it's his killer then. Like, right, his killer is, he's just the only one like that. All police officers are like this. There's not even there's no real corruption in any kind of police station whatsoever. It's just this one person. And now his murderer becomes the scapegoat, right? So now we have another scapegoat that lets us out of our culpability. And it works, but it only, and so it's like this scapegoating system works for us, but it only works for a short time. So what's needed? Well, this is the fifth step. The scapegoating mechanism does work. It's effective, but only for a short time, and less and less as it goes on. So what needs to happen? Well, it needs to be exposed for what it is. So we need to choose the option of peace and equality. We need to realize that the scapegoat is innocent, and we need to turn our attention on ourselves and realize what we have done in our participation in violence. Girard finds his answer in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that he thinks that everyone needs to be Christian or accept Jesus as their own personal Lord and Savior. Remember, this is more of a narrative theory. So you might say it's not based on something that happened out there. It's more something that happens inside of us, right? Remember, he discovered all this by looking at things that have been written down in the past and looking at the similarities in stories. So remember, that's where all this is coming from, is what is at the heart of human existence. What Girard sees in the Judeo-Christian scriptures that's so different from other stories is a refusal to buy into the scapegoat mechanism. And that is, all these stories in scripture, the scapegoat is innocent, and we know he is innocent, right? For instance, and this is a terrific example, and this is Job. So if you don't know anything about Job, Job is this innocent person, and he's being punished by the devil to try to make Job, cursed God. And so basically, the devil takes everything Job has away. And the whole story in this is that like this is a really long book, and it's mostly about his friends coming to him and saying, Job, you're guilty, just admit it, you're guilty, right? But we're told from the very start, Job is innocent. Job hasn't done anything wrong. And it ends up where God basically comes down and says, yeah, all your friends are wrong, and you're right. You didn't do anything wrong, okay? But that's the whole point is that he is innocent. That's where the point is. And so we see this same type of story happen again and again in the Hebrew Bible. But it culminates in Jesus in the New Testament. Jesus is the scapegoated. He is innocent. More than innocent, he's the Son of God. He's the most innocent, right? So there's nothing you can say about Jesus to say he one time said a cuss word, right? And so therefore he deserves the punishment he got. Or he threw his gum on the street and somebody else stepped on it, okay? And that's why it's important that we identify Jesus as God, because in this story, and remember, we're talking about stories here. We're talking about what it means as far as human existence goes. So we're not talking about something out there. We're talking about something in here. But in this story, there's no way that we can say Jesus is not innocent, right? He is the innocent scapegoat. So what happens? Well, once he dies, people look at that sacrifice and they say, oh my goodness, like we tried so hard to get him to be guilty of something, but he never was. He never gave in to that. So maybe I'm the guilty one for putting him on that cross. Like maybe somehow I participate in this. And so that's the whole point of the story is, well, you did, right? You participate in that. And so from now on, you realize that the scapegoating mechanism is a fraud. You have undone the illusion. That's what Jesus did in that story in the Gospels is Jesus undoes the illusion. And once that's done, we have two options. The first is apocalypse. So like I said earlier, if we realize that African Americans are correct, that they are being unfairly scapegoated, well, we could just choose just to say, yeah, you're right, and just kill everybody, right? That is an option to go to all-out war, and that's what Girard says is one of the options that we have after Christ. It's apocalypse. And that's how Girard reads all the apocalyptic texts in the New Testament. That after Christ reveals the illusion to us, those who maintain their violence will just keep getting more and more and more violent, knowing that it's for themselves, like that they are in the wrong, but that they want power, they want position, and they just going to keep fighting and fighting and fighting until the world ends. The other option, though, if you don't like that one, like instead of before killing everybody, let's maybe look at the other option, just so we know we have options out there. The other option is for us to recognize the illusion in the scapegoating mechanism. And so what we start to do is we start to do away with our violence. We start to recognize our own guilt, and we start to seek ways to peacefully love one another. Okay, so in a very small nutshell, that is Girard's theory. So why do I think it's an idea that you should know about? Well, as a Christian, and especially as a pastor, there's a few things I want to point out, and ways that I think this really defines or redefines what Christianity is, and makes it really accessible. First is that it's not historical, but it's literal, or it's literary. And what I mean by that, and why I think that's important, is because Christians have developed this sense that we study history, and we read the Gospels, and we even read the letters of Paul and everything, and we read these things that happened historically. Like we oh, look at this. Isn't that interesting? Jesus, heals a leper, or Jesus, well, all the things Jesus did, right? No, so we look at, Peter denies Christ, okay? And so that's historically something that happens, and we say, that's very interesting. But literarily, what happens in that instance? Okay, well, Peter, this is what Girard says, actually. When Peter looks at Christ, after he denies him, that's when Peter uncovers the scapegoating mechanism. Like, right, he realizes, oh my gosh, I am culpable in Jesus' death. Just by saying I don't know him, I'm culpable in his death. And so that's when Peter breaks the illusion, okay? So anyway, what I'm saying is that is that this isn't something that say, oh, Jesus, he lived approximately 30 to 33 years. He was crucified under Pontius Pilate. He rose again from the grave, and then he ascended to heaven. These are all things he said. Okay, it's not a historical religion, but this is a literary thing, and saying, how does that speak to me? What's the truth of a message there? Okay, so that's one thing that I find very important about this theory. The second thing is atonement. So what that means is something happened to Jesus on the cross. Something happened where Jesus saved us, or took our place, or he died as a ransom for many, as the Gospel of Mark says. But what actually happened? Like, what cosmological thing happened to where Jesus atoned for our sins? Okay, and that's been a debate in Christianity ever since, its inception, really. I mean, even in the Bible, you have different understandings of what exactly happened on the cross, and even Paul seems to use different metaphors and different examples of what actually happened. So Paul has like a whole list of ways that he understands atonement. Well, the one that's most popular, and this has been most popular in Christianity for 1,000 years now, is what's called substitutionary atonement. So even if you're not a Christian and you've heard anything about Christianity, you have probably heard about substitutionary atonement. And substitutionary atonement goes something like this. There is a rule in this universe that God is holy and can't be next to sin. Right? So human beings sin, and so therefore they can't get close to God. God can never be there with human beings. But luckily, there's also another rule of how to get rid of sin. And this other rule says that if you kill something, or death can get rid of sin, right? And so that's why sacrifices were done in the Hebrew Bible, so that we could get rid of the sin and we could be close to God. Okay. What God did was he sent his son to be the perfect lamb to take on all of the sins, and then God died, Jesus died, and now human beings can be with God again. So that's called substitutionary atonement. And there's a lot of problems with that, right? Like, one of them is that, well, if there's these rules in the universe, then God's not really God. The rules are God, right? And so if God is God and makes all the rules, then somehow God is a violent God, right? What Girard's theory does is it relocates the origin of the violence. In this penal substitution model, or this substitutionary atonement model, it's God who is violent. Ultimately, God is the one who demands sacrifice, and the cross is God's violence put upon Jesus. For Girard, it's our own violence that kills Jesus. So, like, Jesus shows up, Jesus is perfect, we try to scapegoat Jesus. Jesus will never, ever buy into or give us any reason to think that Jesus is guilty. And so once Jesus dies, it exposes our own violence. So I like that, in that makes more sense to me as an atonement theory. And it also makes sense to me as though, we always say, like, I'm the reason that Jesus died. Well, in Girard's theory, yes, there's a very clear way that I am the reason that Jesus died. I am the reason that people are scapegoated. So a third reason that I really like this, kind of piggybacking off of that, but a third reason that I think this is something you should know about, and this is something I really like as a Christian, and even more as a pastor, is that it's not a narrative in which my job is to save people from God, because that's ultimately what penal substitution is. And most of the theories are God is a wrathful God. God will get you if you do the wrong thing. So my job is somehow to get to save you from God's wrath. Instead, so in Girard's theory, instead of trying to save people from God, the Christian purpose is to join God in God's fight against violence and sin, so that we are all seeking to help people experience that Christ event, realize their own culpability in violence, realize that they are like everyone else, and create a society in which we respect and love one another. And so once you see that Christ event and notice the innocence of Christ, you start looking at all the scapegoats and realizing the innocence of the scapegoats and the way that we participate in that. So you say, oh my gosh, maybe our our economy's not tanking because we're letting Mexicans cross the border, or maybe they really don't deserve what's happening to them in their own country. Maybe they really are seeking refuge. Maybe apartheid's wrong, right? Maybe we have some kind of hand in that, even things that happen way overseas. Maybe slavery's wrong. Maybe George Floyd was really innocent. Maybe there should be these massive reforms inside of our police academies. So every kind of scapegoat we start to look at, and we realize we are the reason, like individually, but as a collective whole, society has these problems where we are really, they're problems internal, and we're taking them and we're scapegoating others. And as we start to see that, then we can fix our own violence. So let me put it this way. One of the things that I struggle with as a pastor is, like, I would be out in public, and I would just look around, and I would see, like in Music Park, I remember this was the first time it hit me, we were at Disneyland, and I was looking around and I was seeing all these people, and they were happy, and there were families, and I was thinking, do these people really need Jesus? Like, do I just, as a pastor, do I just go up to her and say, hey, would you say real quick that you believe Jesus died for your sins? Because if you say that, then you're going to heaven, like, right, and my job's done. Do they really need Jesus? What do they really need? And so that took me a while to think about and say, what exactly do you need? Well, in Girard's theory, what you need is to realize that you aren't just this isolated family that's in a world. You are part of this social network, and this social network marginalizes people and takes their anger out on people, right? It's scapegoats, and you need to realize that. So I can definitively now say, in a Girardian sense, yes, people need Jesus, right? Maybe they don't need to confess and say, Jesus, save me from my sins, or I'm a big sinner, and so Jesus, I need you to save me, or you have taken my sins upon yourself and made me where I can be one with God. But you need Jesus in the way that you need to realize that it is your anger and your sin that leads to scapegoating innocent victims. Okay, so there's my video on Girard. I want to do a lot more reading in Girard. He's actually very difficult to read, but this is what I'm getting out of it so far. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope this helps you. Be sure to like and subscribe, or at least leave me a comment. Tell me what I could have done better.